Today, Rinpoche gave an excellent presentation of the first 3 stanzas of Lama Tsongkhapa's In Praise of Dependent Origination, explaining the difference between dependent origination of causes and conditions and dependent origination of establishment.
Tobi ombola tende sombi gune toba sombi jusen to ho saji ni je ta tombo tobi ombola tende sombi gune toba tala chuju gune do temba ta jeba sheba do son de do son
Then Tambo the Mingare.
tambo dero tobi ombola tende sombi gune toba tambo je shajaman bodala tende sombi gune toba se tambo je Niba de Tenju Tombe, Jusen Tongwa, Jusen Che, and the dedication on Marba.
Okay, Dixon. And then the Tambo song.
Nije, that Tambula Sunro, Ne, Chuju Jukundo Dembas, Tamboche, Jeba Sheba, Niba Cheton do a Sumba.
Jeba Sheba, expand. Dundua. Dudushe. Don't Dudushe, Sumba?
Don't do us what Shukuluma, Jeba Shesuma, Dudushin.
Okay, then a Tambo?
Tambo Chuju Jukundo Dembas.
Juju.
Chuba Jukundo Dembaje.
Less so. Okay, Kanga Dixon.
Yeah. That Tambo what the Chuju Jukundo Demba, the Kazan Chin, Yaja Jin, and Digro. Kanshi Chuju Jukundo Demba, Shos and Kanshi Zish Sunwai. Chenton Tombalanda, Jawatenjin Tebanjung, Zishin Tumbatalan Dusuate, tended to be to that month. Chuba Jugu Temba, Dudushin Sumba Imbere.
Less so. Okay, so today we're looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's In Praise of Dependent Origination. And we have a commentary, and in this commentary we find that this first stanza and beyond is broken down into various categories. So there's a major heading for the entire root text as far as the commentary goes, and there are actually 2 of them. The first is the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha for his teaching on dependent origination, and then the second category is the reason for this, and then the dedication or the aspiration. So these are the major 2 categories. And then the first category, which is the actual praise to Shakyamuni, we find broken down into 3 categories. The first category is the expression of worship or expression of homage. The second category is the expanded meaning of the text. And then the third category is a summary or a synopsis of what has been presented already. So what was expanded upon is then summarized. So these are the 3 categories under that first major heading. And you have to bear with me. I came from work. I don't have my root Tibetan text. So he who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him a knower and a teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So here, this is the first stanza, and this is where we see the expression of worship or the expression of homage. And that homage or worship, sometimes translated as prostration, is being presented to Buddha Shakyamuni, and specifically for his teaching on dependent origination. Dixon Rinpoche.
What that then what the Tendi Jugundo Tembato did that turned out in the Imare. Kanji Zishi Shesu Shulaka Chiki 20s. Tendi Sumbundo Tembato what the Kanji Zishi Shesu Shulaka Chiki 20s. The Kanji Zishi Sumwa Chento Temalana me, Jawatenji Debanju, Zishin to Watalantus what the Sitake, Choba Jubundo Tembatres.
Less so. So this first stanza itself He who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him a knower and a teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So this entire stanza is dedicated to the expression of worship to Buddha Shakyamuni. Diksun.
Tantric kanji shesu shulka chigi tuante ti tuanda karisana tuanda deresita tuanda tantric kanji chitawa jin ngonsung tu zishin shaja mana bude ane tantric tuanda kanji ane rangi ngonsung tu zi rangi ngonsung tu ziba na jin ane duja jenda la tuamba rangi chita ziba jin somba yi gune sombi gune Rinpa yin, Chenpa lana meba tang, Tunpa lana meba ya jins, Chenpa lana meba tang, Tunpa lana meba ya jins. Shaja mana budi, tenri ki tuan rang chitawa jita ngonsung tu ziba yin tang, Chenpa lana meba res, Chenpa lana meba.
Because of Dan Sun San Chenpa lana meba.
Chenpa lana meba je.
Okay.
Susu ziba na yin la tuanpa yin zang tuanpa la na meba res. Chenpa la na meba ta tuanpa la na meba.
Then Dumba Kandre Garshene Yanju Surano?
Ta jishaja mana budi wa tenre ki tuan chitawa jita ngonsung zi yoro ta. Chen yoro.
Leso.
Chenpa la na meba res.
Leso.
Chenpa na yin la tuanpa yin zang
Jen la
tuanpa la na
okay.
meba.
Tu Chena.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we look at this first stanza, and look at the word by word. He who speaks on the basis of seeing. Here, this is speaking of, referring to, let me read the whole stanza and then I'll go one by one. He who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him a knower and teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So here, he who speaks is referring to Buddha Shakyamuni. Buddha Shakyamuni speaks on the basis of seeing. So what does this mean? Buddha Shakyamuni has had a direct, valid cognition of dependent origination. So there has been a direct experience of this dependent origination that Buddha speaks of. So here it says he speaks on the basis of seeing. So this word seeing is referring to direct, valid cognition, sometimes direct prime cognition, but it's a direct perception that we're referring to of dependent origination. So therefore, because of having this direct perception of dependent origination, this makes him a knower. Because of knowing this from a direct experience, there's no higher way to ascertain something than direct valid cognition. So there is no higher there is no higher knower, because this is the most that can be known of dependent origination, a direct experience of it, and a teacher unexcelled. Because of having had this direct experience of dependent origination, he is able to then share this experiential knowledge with us as students. So it's an actual experiential knowledge that's being shared. So this makes him, because of the direct valid cognition of dependent origination Buddha Shakyamuni has had, this makes him the highest knower and the highest teacher, because having known this topic of dependent origination, he can teach it to others. So I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So here, we have you who saw dependent origination. That's referring to a direct, valid cognition of dependent origination, or of emptiness. So that's what this first stanza means. Diksung Rinpoche. So this is an expression of worship. This is the prostration section, where he who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him a knower and a teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, I prostrate to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So here we find this expression of worship presented to Buddha Shakyamuni because of this direct experience that he has had And because of that direct experience, the ability to share it with others or teach it to others is also present. Digson.
다 땡진 대반주와서 와 땡진 대반주와서 대도나도 가르스나 땡들라 주전라 때문에 땡들다 다질라 때문에 땡리니 고야요레스 주전라 때문에 땡들 다질라 때문에 땡리니 주전라 때문에 땡들스나 안에 어디 가서 네 파마를 제버로 파마를 제버 인자 주전라 때문에 땡들이라 그래스 내부 근거로 주전라 때문에 땡들이스 내부 근거로 랑 줄라 땡들 제버로다 신의 살아되는 제와래 네 보고도 파마를 되는 제와래 듣나지 근데 그거 집어 말বে 주전라 때문에 된데서 그래서 말বে 주전라 때문에 된데
그래서
등가로서 파마를 소소산다나 가로서 파마를 제바 인자 파마를 되는 중앙에서 주전라 때문에 된데 주전라 때문에 된데서 말বে
Okay, so here it says, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So what is dependent origination? What is this referring to? The topic dependent origination can be broken down into two categories. Dependent origination, which is causes and conditions, and then dependent origination, which is establishment. It's the best way to translate it. So these are the two types of dependent origination. And when we look at dependent origination of causes and conditions, this is referring to the general cause and effect relationships things have with one another. So for instance, people's parents get together and then they are born from their parents. So this is a cause and effect relationship that we see. People's parents have a union and then produce a child. Or for instance, a tree grows out of the earth. So these are examples of cause and effect, or conditions and effect. This is one type of dependent origination. And anything that is a product, all effects necessarily fall into this category of dependent origination of causes and conditions. They all have this in common. If they are effects or results, they necessarily are this dependent origination of causes and conditions. Dixon.
사막을라그레스 조타마지 나는 시다마 도도바 산자바 오마바 제가 근데보 줄 템바데 네 강가글라그레스
So
줄든 레벨 템바데 탄주 투무마이 미체슈레스 탄주하게 줄든 레벨 템그레스 러그레스 줄든 레벨 템그레스 줄든 레벨 템바 탄주 투무마이 미체슈에 미체송어데
Judebo la dene.
Jebu jula temba juta maji shikita jundebu la temba tanju tumu mai mi cheshu mi shiris beijing wo de isha de ba yode
Omi Tanjor.
juden jebu la tensa to oma tanju tumu mai mi cheshu res oma tanju lo gere ma do raju ba ta sa ba ta do ba ta shera ma lo go ma res
Then the yan gongel mebachi rimche. Then Tanjor wa gari kelan.
tanju ta na ngaso pamal jebaro
Leso.
ngaso pamal tembaro
Ngatsu pamala den.
pamal ten derota
Leso.
ngaso pamal ten sa de shera ma do ba sanza ba oma ba chama go lagres
Leso.
pama ngasul ten sa de tanju tumu mai bela
Yomari.
tanju res tanju go lagres yenda lo ma res ta
Then the Nisopo lagu. Then Tanjor the Jew depo la dene mayin.
tanju ge ndebe jula ten jun de bula ten ni ga lagres
Nika. Okay. Then the sensampa dan do the
mayin ba
mayin.
me chi de ge wo de ndebe jula ten se gre ma do jun rebel ten lo mares.
Judebala den ma. Okay, Selbulatu. Goya mebachi Rinpoche. I just want to make sure when we're talking about emptiness that I make this a clear presentation because it's there's ramifications if it's not presented clearly. So when we look at this presentation that all results depend on causes, for instance, that we depend upon our parents. All four tenet systems agree with this assertion. So when we look at the tenet systems, we have the Vaibhashika system, we have the Sautrantika system, we have the Chittamantran system, and the Madhyamaka system. And there are subsystems within these. So in English, it's the Great Exposition School, the Sutra School, the Mind-Only School, and the Middle Way School. So all of these have divisions. And when we look at the Middle Way School, or the Madhyamaka School, there are divisions as well. So there is the Middle Way Autonomy, or the Yogacara, and then there's the Middle Way Consequence. And then there's actually, as a translator's note, more subdivisions of the Middle Way Autonomy as well. But there's two. So the Middle Way Consequence School does, though, have a differing view when it comes to the relationship between cause and effect. So they concur, just like all the other tenet systems concur, that all results depend upon causes. But there's an additional assertion in the Middle Way Consequence School. The Tenjora Kona, the Ranju Yomare. Okay, so there's one view that the Middle Way Consequentialists hold relative to cause and effect that's different than the other sub-schools, and that is that not only do the results depend upon their causes, but the causes depend upon their results. So the Middle Way Consequence School states that there's an interdependence there between cause and result that isn't asserted in that way by the lower sub-schools. So this is one subtle differentiation when we look at the relationship between cause and effect and the assertions of those tenet systems. All Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamantara, and Madhyamaka agree all results depend on causes. But the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamantara, and the Madhyamaka, the lower school, the Yogacara school, believes that the results, the causes don't depend upon their results. It's only the Prasangika, the consequentialists, that assert this interdependent relationship between cause and effect. Okay, Digsung Rinpoche. Less so. Selbuldu. So the Middle Way Consequential School's explanation of this is the best explanation, because they state that yes, the parents depend upon the child, because in order for them to be named parents, there has to be a child. So they don't become the name parents without the child being born. So this is the interdependence. In order for there to be a parent, there has to be a child. In order for there to be a child, there has to be a parent. So this is what the consequentialists assert. Shea is Selbuldu. Okay, so when we look at the tenet systems then as a summary, the Prasangika, the Middle Way Consequence School, of the highest of the tenet systems, as a translator's note, assert that effects depend on causes and causes depend on effects. But all of the lower schools, the Middle Way Autonomy, the Mind-Only, the Sutra School, and the Great Exposition School, only assert that effects depend upon causes. They don't assert that further analysis that the causes depend on effects as well.
안는 가솔 조지 본부 수유 본부 주시지 본부 주시 본부 나와시 본부가도와 나와시 본부가데 어디 가서 어디 본부가 보고는 된 답이지고 가자고 세지 말বে 가서 본부갈 때도요 본부갈 때 봐요서 본부가 때 가서 차지레스 다지레스 다질라 때문에데스 다질라 때문에 답은 가서 컴바는 자자바이나 컴바가 수지도 컴바데 다지레스 컴바도 수지라 뛰네 는 컴바스 메가다고
Shuje Ladun Zena?
is south
Tuchena.
yeah.
Okay. Based on Tuchena.
컴바도 수지라 뛰는 답은 수 컴비 수지도 컴비 다지레스
Leso.
다질 때문에 말봐
Leso.
다질 때문에 안에 주주식 걸어 다질 때문에 답아 있는다 마답아 있는다
Leso.
다질 때문에 차우스 다질 때문에 주진ల 때문에 다질 때문에 무슨 잔지 무슨 주진ల 때문에 이나 다질 때문에 차
Leso.
다질 때문에 이나 주진ల 때문에 마셔 안은 고대도 자도
Leso.
나가
Leso. Shade Sobuldu. So that is dependent origination of causes and conditions. The next is dependent origination of establishment, and this refers to all things. So an example, or what the meaning of this is, when we look at the definition of person, a person, it's a being. The definition of person is a being imputed on any among the five aggregates. So the aggregates are form, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness. So these are the five aggregates that make up a person, if you will. So it's a being imputed upon any among those five aggregates. As a translator's note, it says any among because there are realms that only have four aggregates. The formless realm only has four aggregates. Translator's note. So going back to the explanation, when we look at dependent origination of establishment and we look at a person, these aggregates come together and then they are named, this collection then is named as person or nominally designated as person. A house, for instance, this is named as a house. So based on the four directions, north, south, east, and west of this thing, we look at those four directions put together, this compound or collection, and then name it as house. This is the dependent origination of establishment. This is mere, and this not only refers to impermanent phenomena, but also permanent phenomena. So this is why it is pervasive through all phenomena, this type of dependent origination. So being a person, we have the five aggregates, form, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness come together and then named as person. And we have a house, we have four directions, north, south, east, and west come together and named as house. So when we compare these two types of dependent origination, if we compare dependent origination of causes and conditions and dependent origination of establishment, we'll find that there are three permutations or three possibilities. Anyone who's new, if you look at the Buddhist debate or Buddhist logic, it's a way to analyze any two phenomena. It is either three permutations, four permutations, synonymous or mutually exclusive. Those are the only possibilities when you compare any two phenomena. When you compare these two phenomena, you come up with three permutations, three possibilities. So what that means is, when we compare these two subjects, dependent origination of causes and conditions and dependent origination of establishment, if it is a dependent origination of causes and conditions, it is necessarily a dependent origination of establishment. So there's a pervasion there. And so when we say these permutations or possibilities, it is referring to this potential for pervasion or not. So if it is a dependent origination of causes and conditions, it is necessarily a dependent origination of establishment. But if it is a dependent origination of establishment, it is not necessarily a dependent origination of causes and conditions. So if you say posit then something which is one but not the other, you would say the subject cessation. The subject cessation is dependent origination of establishment, but not a dependent origination of causes and conditions, because it's permanent. Uncompounded space is another example of a subject you could use, which is dependent origination of establishment, but not dependent origination of causes and conditions, because it's another permanent phenomena, unobstructed space. And that's when it's obstructed, it's impermanent, but when it's unobstructed, it's permanent in Buddhist philosophy. So we have a dependent origination of establishment there. We have a name, but we don't have dependent origination of causes and conditions because of its permanence. Nika Yimba, Gangisime Kanga Lagu. Okay, so, and when we look at something which is both, because that's part of the possibilities, something which is both dependent origination of causes and conditions and dependent origination of establishment, can use any subject which falls under the category of dependent origination of causes and conditions. Because we know that if it's that, it's necessarily of establishment. So any subject is a subject which is a topic used. And then Mayimba, Ribon. Okay, and then something which is neither of the two would be a rabbit with horns. So a non-existent thing. So we learned last class that it has to exist in order to be a dependent origination. It can't be something you can make up in your mind. It has to be something that exists, a valid cognition. Khensur Rinpoche.
대시 댄중을 번디네 땅에 타와타다 쥐버시스 댄중을 땅한다 들었대네 땅에비 저거가 쥐어두고 그랬어 어때 댄데 땅한다데 돈이 주고 땅한다가 잡으인스
레서 너는 베체 르롱 갈
대시 댄데를 번디네 땅에 타와다 오만 주고 인제래 댄중 댄데 땅한다라 때네 다울로버가 쥐어두고 가두고 그랬어
able to okay. So there's a large amount of, there are many ways to look at dependent origination. And by using this understanding of dependent origination, one establishes emptiness. So emptiness, the understanding of emptiness requires analysis, and it is said that dependent origination is the king of analysis when it comes to understanding emptiness. So, for instance, we go back to the subject of this house. We say we have a house here. So we have four directions, north, south, east, and west, that create a compound, create a collection. These four directions of this thing create a collection that then is nominally designated as house. But there is no inherently existent house that is separate from that collection which is nominally designated. There's no house that can be found which is separate from this basis of designation named as house, this whole process, this naming of house. You can't find a house that has inherent existence outside of this process, a singular type of existence. There's always this dependent origination. So we look at these directions, this coming together, this compound nominally designated as house. There is no house that is inherently existent, separate from this collection that's nominally designated. So in the Madhyamika Avatara by Chandrakirti states that with the analysis of dependent origination, one is able to negate any mistaken view. So any view presented as a note by other schools, other systems, according to Chandrakirti, can be negated by the analysis of dependent origination. So that is why it is said to be the king of signs for emptiness, or the king of analysis, the king of analysis, Diksun Rinpoche.
What did tende ta jujen la tembe tende daji la tembe tende ro daji la tembe tende ta ngaso te ta ngaso pomunga do wote ngaso daji la gre ngaso pomunga la tu na ngaso jogo ro.
So we ourselves are a collection of these 5 aggregates that come together and then are named.
Tan dunju de cha cha ban dunju de shu jin do shu je la den dunju ta wo kanga ta wo ro ta.
Duju?
Tembo.
Oh, okay. So the temple, looking at a temple or a house is the same thing, looking at these directions, north, south, east, and west, and seeing this collection in the same way that we did with these aggregates forming this collection. So this is this establishment, dependent origination. So we can apply this same understanding to all phenomena. So if we slowly look at each phenomena and apply this same analysis or the same logic, then we will understand it quite readily.
Less
so?
To be humble, then is one gonna turbo down. Don't be just to go on. Tiny butter, to be just down. To be near the la, to be just down. Turbang Sajini Jimudwe. Nibala to be just down. And Turbang Sajini near the door. Niba.
Okay, so now we
just had to go on with my back.
Nipa, the Tambo Nipa, Sumba Nipa?
Tambro, Tambo the Chibala, to be humble at Nende Sumba on the Tuba, don't be just had to go on home, my back. Tambola Chuji, you can do that, but Jeba Shiba, never Jeba Shiba, Jeba Shiba.
Okay, okay.
Jeba Shiba the la,
lesser.
To be just had down.
Okay. Gongel Mepachik. Okay, Nipa. Okay, then in Nipa, the Ewa Yanjar Suranang.
Nipa del Tubang to be Jusen or Tubang Sajini Ro.
Reason and actual praise.
Okay.
So now that was the first category. So we have the 2 major headings, the praise to Shakyamuni and then the reason for and then the dedication. So we're still under that first category, praise, and there are 3 categories under that first category. So we just went over the expression of homage or expression of worship, and then the next category is the expanded meaning. So the expanded meaning is broken down into 2 categories. So the first category, where did I write it? I wrote it somewhere. The expanded meaning is broken into 2 categories. The reason for homage, the dupi jutsen, and then the actual homage. That's what it is. The reason for homage and then the actual homage. So these are the 2 categories.
Tubi Jusen the Tubanguini Tambula, Tendi Sheba, Tembi Himbu Temba Saji Tambuje, Tendi Jukun Tubas of Tela Sajini Tigua, Tendi Sheba, Tembi Himbu Temba Dan, Temba, Tambuje, Tendi Jukun Tuba, Tuban Hampas, Sajini Tigua.
Okay. Then the Nipa Sache Ni Yure.
Yeah.
Jutsen, Dangwu, then Jutsen, Ni Yure. Okay, then Ni.
Tendi Sheba, Tembi Himbu Temba Tambuje,
Dembi Ni,
Tendi Jukune,
essence.
Tuban Hampas,
Dupa ngapa, Serna? Dupa ngapa?
Tendi gun toba ya shure toba del lab toba yo mares.
Best praise. Okay.
What the ngapa sur ngapa.
Oh, ngapa, lapa, ngapa. Okay. Tu chena. So then the second category has two categories. No, I'm sorry. This first category has two categories. First is the essence of this praise, and then why it's the best praise. So these are the two headings under, we're in the second category, the first category of the second category. There's two categories. So that's where we're at right now. Okay.
Da tendi gun tendi shiba tembi himba temba tendere da tombu ne jiden goba chinye ba ti zo mari te kanshi tongyu ta duba tenjin de ban jong wasu ta sulo da temba yi tenjin de ban jong yi la kyeje ne tembi ne ni do cheta kong chumin jurus wo tege ne de yung wo res da tendi shiba tembi himba temba res tendi shiba de chajaman mo de temba ge himba res hindam hard himba temba.
So the commentary says that this dependent origination is really the essence or the heart of what Buddha Shakyamuni has taught or has presented to us. So we're summarizing the commentary Rinpoche has.
Tan jiden goba jenye bati zo marite jiden goba jenye bati zo marite kanshi tongyu tadu ba tenjin de ban jong wasu ta sulo da temba yi tenjin de ban jong yi la kyeje ne tembi ne ni do cheta kong tu chumin yoros
Shloka Nipa?
o de shulga ni re do chije
Okay.
chije re do wa ta dombo de jiden goba jenye bati zo mari so de marbe ta jiden goba jenye bata nga so o de Roa de to marbe nga sun dendu sun tu marbe dendu sun o de solo chi du nge gai du nge nai du nge chi du nge mo yo de marbe de su so de garesna toma mariba de res toma mariba chuno de ba juban de bidezi toma mariba de ja ures ti zo mari des jiden guba chenye ba ti zo mari de tang nga sun da dendu sun de jega na shi du nga so mo yo ro o de su ge zawa de toma mariba de zawa shebala tene nyemonche lesa ne anu wa de denu de ngan ku yong res ji de ngan da gai de ngan la su ba ti zawa de wa de toma mariba de res mariba.
So now we move on to the second stanza in the root text. Whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So here, whatever degenerations there are in the world. So we look at cyclic existence. There are 6 realms of cyclic existence. There's 3 lower realms and 3 higher realms. The hell realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the animal realm. And then the lower, those are the 3 lower realms. And the higher realms, the gods, humans, demigods, and gods. So these realms are plagued with various types of, suffering, such as the suffering of birth, suffering of aging, the suffering of sickness, suffering of death. So it's stating that all of these negativities that are experienced in the world, in cyclic existence, it says the root of all these is ignorance. So at the root of all of these types of suffering, we find ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So looking at the 12 links of dependent origination, we find that the first link, which begins cyclic existence, is benighted ignorance or ignorance. So it says the root of all these is ignorance, because in dependence on ignorance, we have afflictions that arise. And then these afflictions cause karma or action. Karma just is a Sanskrit word that means action or activity, movement of some sort, body, speech, and mind. So we then have this ignorance that creates these afflictions, that creates negative actions, that create cyclic existence. So we see how at the beginning of that cycle we have ignorance. So here it says whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. So the sufferings, the negativities of cyclic existence are brought about by ignorance because ignorance is what creates the cycle. Digsun.
Jiten goba jinba di tsindi di lehegduwa. Jiten goba su go su cisu jeba nyi zong des shulka nyi ro. Cisu jeba ci je. Nyi zong de duanda teres jiten na jaga na chi su dans dendu song de ngandu song de sule ji dunga gai dunga na dunga la su ba yo marbe. Jaga su ji juncha ji goba jenye yoba jiten goba jenye ba se ro. Jenye yoba di zao ju zao de ne tatuba ne chudan kaza ki chudan kaza rajin ji joban jimbi denzi ji mari ba ja des jiten goba ta dendu song de ngandu song ki dungen la su de zao de kaza de chuji danji mari ba ja gure se ta kaza ga danji chuji danji mari di zao mari des deja gures mari te tendi ji chuni sa mo kanji ngonsung du tongwa te tendi chuni kanji sa mo ngonsung tongwa te tobe mari ba de doban ju na mari ba de bombi tazo jawa tenji jaban jongwa somba wos ta kante wo tese de mari ba ta kante chuna de ba juban ji tenzi de denzi du lo shiro ta nga rangon ro ziba du lo shiro nga deba ro ziba du lo shiro nga deba ma ro ba che sona nga deba ro denzi no marbe taba dru mai me che sona taba dru ji lo no marbe o tena bo so marbe nga deba ma ro she lo de nga rangon ro ba ziba du no gres taba dru mai me ziba lo de ge taba dru ji lo no ba gres chudan kaza ka danzi kaza sina nga su kaza sakin tu bing si kuru beta kaza rangi senji chuban zibatil kaza ka danzi la kuru beta kaza mayin bi chu deba chuban zibatil chuji danzi sikiris chudan chedan shi chuna chuyi mi charo beta chudan kaza nyi su chu mayin si chudan kaza nyi su chu de chudan kaza nyi su de kaza mayin bi chu de rwa kaza mayin bi chu denpa chuban ziba tele chuji danzi kaza denpa chuban lo tele kaza ka danzi sikiris kaza denpa maruba she suna kaza ka danzi nyo de chu denpa maruba she suna chuji danzi nyo de gres pena taba dru mayin bi she suna druzi jilo nyo de gres o de she de marbe
then the Sikh J Kabarkagadu Rinpoche. The Tambo, the Shiluka Chi, the Chupa.
Shiluka Chi.
Then Chupa. Then a Shiluka Nipa, Dang Sumba, Tanda?
Tanda Shiluka Nima do Modo, Chi Je no Ji.
Sikh Che.
Jiden Goba Jeneva, Ti Zaw Marite, Kanshi Tun Tadu, Tenji Jabanjuma Sun, Je.
Lesso.
The Silo no Demba, Tenji Jabanjuma.
Lesso. Okay.
Chuji Nebi Nenyo, Cheta Kundu Chumi Jero.
The Lam. Okay. Okay. So we're going to include the next stanza as well. So I'm going to read it and then I'll begin this commentary. Whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So how can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? So whatever degenerations there are in the world, so whatever negativities, we have the three lower realms and the three higher realms. We have various types of suffering, birth, aging, sickness, and death. There are various sufferings that these individuals experience, and these sufferings are caused by ignorance. So here it says, at the root of all of this is ignorance. So what is this ignorance referring to? So it says, you taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So the opposite of dependent origination is the ignorance. So what is that? It's the belief that, for instance, if we use the subject I am truly established. There is not dependent origination. This is the misconception. This is the ignorance. This idea that I am truly established. And when we look at grasping at true establishment, there's two types. There's grasping at the true self of persons, and then there's grasping at true self of phenomena. Grasping falls into one of these two categories, that grasping at true self of phenomena and grasping at true self of person. So this misconception that sees the I, for instance, as being truly established can only be counteracted or only be gotten rid of by the opposing view that sees that the I is not truly established because of dependent origination. So the only opponent to the misconception that sees things are truly established is to see that they are not truly established. Just like if you had the misconception when you walked into a dark room that a rope was a snake. The only thing that would get rid of that misconception is realizing that it's a rope, that it's not a snake. Likewise, the only thing that can get rid of the misconception that grasps at the I as being truly established is the truth that the I is not truly established. This counteracts that mistaken view, just like the understanding that the snake is not that the rope is not a snake, that it's a rope. Likewise, one understands the I is not truly established because of dependent origination. The I is not truly established. The I, so the misconception is the true establishment of the I, and the correct perception is the lack of true establishment of that I. Just like the misconception is that a rope's a snake, and the correct perception is that it's a rope. So the only thing that gets rid of the snake example is knowing it's a rope. The only thing that gets rid of the misconception that the I is truly established is the understanding that it's not. So we grasp at the, when we see this grasping at phenomena or grasping at self, at persons, person is referring to the being imputed upon those five aggregates. And anything that isn't that is considered this grasping at phenomena. So when we look at categorically, anything that's not person and that is grasped at is considered grasping at the self of phenomena. So this is why it says that the root of all this is ignorance, and you taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. This word, where they translated the seeing, in the Tibetan, the word for direct perception is used. So this direct perception will undo the ignorance. So directly seeing this dependent origination will undo ignorance. And why? Because ignorance is the root of all the degenerations in the world. So if that's gotten rid of, the degenerations are gotten rid of, because it's the root of them. This is how we, so how can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? Based on that it undoes the world, undoes cyclic existence, how can someone say it's not the pith of Buddhist teaching? So we'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Sheda Selbadu Rinpoche Tu Chena.
Tan jiten goba chenya ba ti tsawa mari tsong ju ta kan te dendu to ngendu tu chega na shi dongela so ba tu tsawa de wa te mari patres mari ba kar ja urusna mari ba la te khona ni la mari ba de la mari ba ni no ne te khona ni la mari ba kanza da chu de ba tu ba de den de wa te tsawa tres chu da kanza raji ji de ba Demanzeba Mariba Jades Kazaga Danze to Shuji Danze to what they Tuma Mariba res, Dogang Zawares, Dendi Chuni Salmon Kaji Monsundo, Dendi Imbi Jusenji Chuna, Deva Mariba Monsun Tonsula, Monsun to Ton a dead. Dobe Mariba Doban Junas, Chuna Deva Maruba, and the Monsun Tuzuna. Chuna deba drume denziji mariba donugres taba druma imishibi le taba drunji lo dona dabres doba sombi na mariba bon yu tauso ane chuna deba drubanzi denzi mariba bon bi tauso jawa shajaman buddha gwa tende sombres tende tenjin deba jungwa somba wos tenjin deba jungwa somba wos Tende image using Chuna Deva Maruba Shedo, Chuna Deva Maruba Shesuna, Denzi Maribal Nerduro, Marib Pontugoro, Mariba Pomp Taus, 10 days sombres, Tenji Deva Somba was.
So, whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all of these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo ignorance. So whatever negativities, birth, aging, sickness, death there are in the world and the cyclic existence of the six realms, the root of these is ignorance. And when we look at what kind of ignorance, ignorance is divided into two categories. Ignorance of nature, ignorance of karma and its results, and then ignorance of the nature of reality. So when we look at those two divisions, it's ignorance of the nature of reality that we're referring to when we say it's the root of all the degenerations. It's that specific type of ignorance. So it's from that ignorance, that ignorance is the grasping at true self of person, the grasping at true self of phenomena. That's what the ignorance of the nature of reality is. So that is what the root of all the degenerations are. So it says, you taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo ignorance. Just like the example, what undoes the misconception that a rope is a snake? Understanding that it's a rope. So what undoes the misunderstanding that things are truly established, or that things are have a true self of persons or phenomena. Dependent origination is what undoes that ignorance. So again, knowing a rope is a rope and not a snake undoes the ignorance that thinks it's a snake. Knowing that things are not truly established because of dependent origination undoes the degenerations of the world. Diksung Rinpoche.
The Maribanes and the these are Marits, Maribaden, the Maribane, Nada, Nai Habasu, Kazak Danzita, Kazak Danzit, Chuji Danzi Jagroa, Kazak Danzit shows and the Jagdota, Conkibaredisha, Nada Nayo Habasu, Kazak dance, Narangon Rubanzebata, Nayo Rangon Zebani, the Kazak Danzis, Nazana. Nga ayisatruwa nga de patruban tenzite ne kazak danzi ngayo rangon truban zebate kazak danzi agures ta ngayo asna ne ngasna ruwa ngasna nga rangon truban zeba kazak danzi laba ngayi bisajuro laba ngayi bate rangon truban zebatala ngayo rangon truban zebasere Pompunga ngai imba rangon ruban zembatel ngayo rangon ruban zembas teni ja kazak danzires nga rangon ruban zembate kazak danzire laba ngai imba daba ruban zembatela kazak danzires kazak dani ja ni yesong yare
Rinpoche, the kamba ngai imba the
laba ngai imba ro laba ngai laba rangon ruban zembat chuji danzi isere Laba ngai bicha deba ruban zebatele ngaiwa rangon ruban zebas the kazak danzing is one
ngaiwa
ngaiwa this had my ngai is marbe ngai ba rangon ruban zebate ngayo rangon ruban
Yine the ngai mota ngai wa yomare.
motor ngayo basana ro ta this car is my
Mine. Okay. Then kanga. Okay.
this house is my
Okay. The nge triwa. The nge wa. Okay. Okay. So then the long yurube yomare.
lo yer da lo da lo
The long cabernet Rinpoche. The long yurube. Okay, so the Gangesena, the Lung Kanga Nga Yure. So the grasping at I and mine is what we're really talking about when we say this grasping at the self of persons. So what is that? It's grasping at the I and grasping at mine. So grasping at the I as being truly established is obvious. It's me. Grasping at this I, this ego, Atman, anything you want to translate it as, is what that refers to. Grasping at mine, for instance, this is my arm. So the grasping at the I is believing that the I is truly established, that there's an inherently existent I that is there. Grasping at mine is, for instance, this is my arm, and believing that there is an inherently existent arm that I possess, that's mine. So I grasp at myself as being inherently existent, and then grasp at what's mine as being inherently existent. So what I was asking Rinpoche is, does it have to be parts of your body, or could it be your car, my house? And under these terms, I know it's all empty, but for this terminology. And he said, yes, it also, my parts could refer to things like a car or a house, anything that you believe is yours. And then that believing that that thing that is yours is truly established, and that it being yours is truly established. So you believe that yourself is truly established and what you possess is as well. So this is what we're referring to when we say this grasping at the true self of persons. Okay, Dixon.
The maribane ngada ngai nyamba so kaza dans ngarangon ruben zeba ngaiwa rangon ruben zeba nyebet kaza ga danzi res kaza ga danzi chu raje ji ruban zembe ne danzi shila jubasa tiza mari seade kaza ga danzi ta chu deba ruben danzi nil ja gores kaza rangon ruben zeba ni do ta ngada ngaiwa rangon ruben kaza ga danzi res kaza dans chu raje ji ruba kaza mayin bi chu ne rangon ruben zeba de 추지 단지 세그레스 what these are Marie said teleja gures
Lesso. So going back to whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all of these is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So looking at the grasping at the true self of persons and phenomena. So grasping at true established person, we divide into those two categories, I and mine, or my parts, if you will, I and my parts. So the belief that I am inherently existent, that I am inherently existent is this self of persons that is I. The self of persons that is mine is what I possess, anything that I believe that I possess, and believing that that is inherently established. So it is this belief in these inherent establishment of self of persons and phenomena, that in phenomena is anything that isn't self of persons, I or mine, that is the root. That is the root of the degenerations in the world, what causes the degenerations of the world. Need somebody to Kanga.
This one.
Dig song, need somebody.
That is all Marie said the Kazaka dance, choose the Nijagur, Kazaka dance shows na Nata Ngayoa, Ngayo, Nyabasu, Kaza dance, Narangon to Benzabatan, Ngayo around to Benzabatan, Kazaka dance is.
Less so.
What the Puchagenda, Puchanalula, Ngayo around to Benzabatan, Narangon to Benz, Katu to Toba Mobiorda, Puchandam Mominol, Soba Mobiores.
Less so. So there, this, when we look at what the root of all these, the root of all these is ignorance. That ignorance that's being spoken of is the grasping at the self of persons and grasping at the self of phenomena. So grasping at the self of persons is grasping at I and mine. So this grasping at the self of persons of I and mine there's an enormous amount of debate about that topic in the systems, various tenet systems, and so forth. So there's a lot of discussion and debate about that topic.
So in
Panchen Sonandrapa's texts, he asserts that the persons grasping at true self of persons is believing that I and mine are inherently established. Others don't, but Panchen Sonandrapa believes that this is what the grasping at self of persons is, the grasping at inherent existence of what is I and mine.
So
next we get into this is the grasping at the inherent existence of I and mine, which is the grasping at true self of persons. Anything which isn't that falls into the category of grasping at the self of phenomena. So that's what we get into next. Rinpoche's reading through the commentary. It says, now that we've gone over these two, the I and mine, the true self of persons, now we get into everything that is not that, which is true self of phenomena. And that's what's the next thing to be negated. Digson.
That then the Mariba, the Kazaka dance, Chuji dance, Mariba de, and then you move in Tajik Zawares, Kazaka dance, Chuji dance, and Doshak Zaware, Najak Zaware, Tamuk Karsure. When you move in Tajik Najela Subi, you move in Tajik Zawares, tell us then you move in Tajik waters.
So, and then this grasping at the self of persons and self of phenomena is the root of all of the afflictions. So when we look at what the root of the poisons are, for instance, of attachment, hatred, and ignorance, we'll find, or delusion it's translated as, so there's not we'll find that at the root we have ignorance, and any of the other afflictions as well, such as pride or miserliness. All of these we find at the root ignorance.
What do I about the Umajuba le, Numujuna Malunjitula, Talishua, she dancer, Talishua, Louis Tonja, Dan, the you to do Shene, Nenjuba, Dan Gubashes. What they can go to that. Numujuna, Numusana, and then I saw the Shakonda Super Numarive. Numubi June. Chi dunga, gai dunga, nai dunga, chi dunga la suwa. Tusu nyomo bi jun res, nyomo jun. Nyomo bata nyomo bi jun, malu ba, nyomo jun na malu jitu la, tali shungwa as. Nyomo bata nyomo bi jun, chika na chi dunga la suwa. Te tangji, chuna deba kanzaka danzi, te chuji danzi li shungwa res, tali shungwa as. 달리 좀 가자가 단지 가자 대바주버지 대진 당 최 대바주버지 대진을 좀 요레스 달리 좀 셰당스 달리 좀 류통주 다는 디유도 도시네 내주바이 다는 거 봐시 오마 주버도 가도 요래.
So then we find a quote from the Chandrakirti's Madhyamika Avatara, where we're saying that the root of all of these negativities in this text, the root of all of these is ignorance. And we look at ignorance, we have those two, grasping at the true self of persons and phenomena. So in Chandrakirti's text, we find a similar position, where it says, perceiving that all faults and all afflictions flow from the idea of the transitory composite, and knowing that its focus is the very self, this is the self, this self is what the yogi will disprove. So very similar point being made. It says, perceiving that all faults and all afflictions. So all faults are what come from the afflictions. So the afflictions are attachment, hatred, ignorance, etc. And what comes from that are the faults, such as birth, aging, sickness, death. So perceiving that all faults and all afflictions come from the flow from the view, from the idea of the transitory composite. So from grasping at true self of persons and true self of phenomena comes all faults and all afflictions. So knowing this, the yogi tries to disprove that self which creates all faults and all afflictions. And knowing that it is that its focus is the very self, this self is what the yogi will disprove.
다 나한테 레오데 뜨모니 비자와도 송도스 다 참만한테 그 뜨모니 비자와 이 송도스 뜨모데 가자가 단지 취지 단지부터 더고나니라 말이 벌어 뜨모로 어디 녀모바도 녀모비 타지가 자와데 인송으로스 뜨모니 비자와데 셰송비 셰로서 어디래
It's Sawa Gare, Dazin.
가자가 단지 취지 단지부터
Okay, it's Sawa. Okay,
제가 나시 동해로 수비 사와레스
So in the Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika Karika, Dharmakirti states that delusion and the others have it at its root. So what is it? Grasping at true self of persons and grasping at true self of phenomena. So we find it in Dharmakirti's text as well. Digson?
다도 참만나네 저는 참만나네 세상 비중이 일라 그래 세상 비. 참만나네도 시라마도도 봐 세상 봐 오마 봐 지금나네 참만나네 세상 비중이 일라 그래.
Lesso.
세상 봐 제나 안에 귀자와데 가자가 단지자마도 취지 단지 디자가 말이다.
Lesso. But when we look at the Pramanavartika Karika by Dharmakirti, and we look at it in terms of tenet systems. So there are 4 tenet systems. The Vabhashka, which is Great Exposition School, Trantika, which is Sutra School, Chittamantra, which is Mind-Only School, and Madhyamaka, which is Middle Way School. When we look at these tenet systems, Dharmakirti was a view holder of the Chittamantran school, the Mind-Only school. So he would assert, his personal assertion would be that the root of cyclic existence is grasping at the self of person. Grasping at the self of phenomena wouldn't be presented in that mind-only school. It would be presented in terms of grasping at the self of persons. So that would just be one differing view from that text that was just quoted, because it's not a text written in the Madhyamaka view.
다시 마리바네 렌델라 모 마리바타 저코나니라 모 마리바 니송 빈드네 쉐마이라스 제타 마리바들 렌델라 모 마리바타 저코나니라 모 마리바 니그나네 단단데 저코나니라 모 마리바타 자 디조 마리디세아데 저코나니라 모 마리바를 자고레스.
Then this text goes on to say that when we look at ignorance, we've already gone over this before, but when we look at ignorance, there are 2 types. ignorance of the nature of reality and ignorance of karma and its results. And the author, Junu Jetsun Drapa Shidrup, states that it is the ignorance of the nature of reality that we're speaking of in this context. It's not the other.
다 렌델라 뭐 마리바스나 가서 거와줘도 뭐 거와줘도 산다는 지금도.
So in order to get rid of the ignorance of karma and its result, we can just merely think about the karma and its results and think of it in terms of the 10 virtuous actions and the 10 non-virtuous actions.
뭐 거와줘라 때네. 되는 게 손당고 제가 나시 동에라 소도 좀 말해.
So in dependence upon the non-virtuous deeds, dependence upon the 10 non-virtuous deeds, we have the arisal of the 3 lower realms of cyclic existence.
다 거와를 때는 도와 용으로 도와 네 하다 말이지 네 하다 메 도와다 네 타비 도와다 선지 도와도 좀 오셔로다.
So in dependence upon those virtuous activities, the 10 virtuous activities, we have the result of the higher realms of cyclic existence of the gods, demigods, and humans, and results of liberation and ultimate Buddhahood.
다 거와주 데보다 먹어주 데보 가서 산다나 너데 시감만 메시바진도 어때 레네로 뭐 말해봤을 말이다. 거와주 데보체 따와진도 가서 산다나 시도 말봐. 메시바진도 와. 먹어주 데보데 내가 주산다나 먹어주들 등에 뜻한테 용거를 정말지진 아주 시가 말어. 메시바진도 와. 렌데로 뭐 말해봤어.
So we don't know or understand this connection, that these specific non-virtues lead to these specific sufferings, and these specific virtues lead to these specific happinesses. So this is what the ignorance of karma and its result is referring to. We don't know these things. We can learn them and then get rid of that ignorance, but we don't know these things. So that state of not knowing the relationship between virtue and its results and non-virtue and its results is the ignorance. That state of misknowing or not knowing that is the ignorance of karma and its results. Digsun.
다 타코나니라 뭐 말이바니 소빈데네 셰마오스 타코나니라 뭐 말이바드레스 디토 마리드사데 타코나니라 뭐 말이발자 오레스 마리바니가 너네 타코나니 뭐 말이바들 타와도 라바니 요레스 들랑아 차라니레 타와이노스 타코나니 뭐 말이바들 타와도 라바니가 너네 디토 마리드사데 마리바 타와들 자고레스 타와이노스 다 타코나니라 마리바 가자가 단지 취지 단지니들 타와도 라바 간다 자고르스나 네 라바 간다 자고르스나 타코나니라 뭐 마리바다 가자 데바트번 단지들 주셀라 된 데바트번 제바지다 주셀라 마투바 데바트번 제바니 요도 말바 주셀라 된 데바트번 제빌로텔라 테라 로테라바레스 주셀라 마투바 nga shuge ngara ngon chuba chu 데바트번 제바데 참으레스 주셀라 마투비 나 가자가 단지다 취지 단지도 디자 마리드세야데 오데자 오레스 주셀라 마투비 마리바데 주셀라 투비 마리바데 라바레스 대샤주요 마레스
The Lenchi-dang.
Okay.
Kuchena kansa. Ngay the mambo shingme in the debts. Okay. So when we find the quotes or points made where it says its root is ignorance. So cyclic existence root is ignorance. So ignorance, we have those two. Grasping at the true self of persons, grasping at the true self of phenomena. When we have the subject ignorance, there is coarse ignorance and subtle ignorance. Coarse ignorance is the ignorance that requires a reason and analysis to come up with the mistaken view, this thinking. One that doesn't require analysis, that just naturally arises is the subtle. And this is what we're really speaking of getting rid of, is the subtle natural ignorance. So there is I think it's translated as artificial and natural in terms of the words they use in English. It's artificial and natural. The natural does not require thinking process. The artificial ignorance does. So in this text, Junu Jetsun Drapa Shidrup says that we're speaking now of the subtle type.
That kaji do what you got do. That Mesheba kaji shanaki ngobula chabi sanala danzi to do about the chit truth is kaji go what the sanat danzi is a location to
Less so.
Sanat danzi is at the could nurture chibures chit truth. Tala danzi to tiba chichunki chedenji jun kanle jamashibe shanang ngobula chabi sanate ne danzi is in the tiba chichung jun kanle sheo mares mashiba is also nurture is mashibi shirosa mashibi shiro the ji
Sena. The Dazin. Okay. Dazin Mare. Kashe Dazin Yin. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So then the text goes on to say that there's been mistaken analysis made by some scholars who have stated that this grasping at the true self, an example of it is miserliness, or that it is miserliness. This is negated when the correct presentation is given, but the text just points out a wrong view that's out there, that when we look at this grasping at the true self, we're referring to miserliness, or there's some, that's the best way to greed or miserliness. So that's not correct.
That then my test of what my ship is come by Shaman Jung Shiba, Jung says in the June, and Kanshi told you to do a tangent of Jung Sons, to do a tangent of Jung Son, Jung said to not that is come by Shaman Jung Son Shiba on your days, tended the Tomo, the Tomo my tended new orders.
Less so.
Tomo tended the Tomo my tended new.
Less so.
Rang chashi la tene droba ne tomo tende res rang chashi ane kamba ki shuje te chela du ne kamba droba te wate tomo tende la gures pomo nga la du ne nga droba te tomo tende la gures ne tomo tende dans medan medan toba tanje jabi Robane, Tomuma, Tenji, Twenty.
Less so.
De la Tuti, de Suchina, Mongosa.
Less so.
Medan, Tobi Tatanji, Toba Tanji, Jabi, Durune, Tomuma, Tanju, Tomuma, in Sarota.
Less so.
Miss Tang also murder me, review Marbe.
Less so.
Make it Tatan this. And then now you to be Tatan this. Nijudu na tobi tazan in bichap, mingi jazan in bichas, chas medan tobi tazan jabe troba de tumu mai bitende res, tumu mai bitende.
Okay, so then the text goes on to say that there is common and uncommon types of dependent origination. So, for instance, if we were to say that a house comes together because of the four directions. This is what would be, I believe all the tenet systems would concur with this, that there's the four directions and they come together, and then this is how a house arises, these four parts. But the idea that this collection comes together and then is nominally designated, and that's what brings it into being, is an uncommon view that is held by the middle way consequence school solely. So all of the schools below that would agree that this house has these 4 directions of walls and so forth that come together and then allow for an arisal of house. But the designation is the differing view that the middle way consequence school holds that others don't. That its arisal, part of its arisal is the naming process. So the name of it brings it into being. So the naming, nominal designation is the term here. Nominal designation is something that is exclusive to the Prasangika school and not presented in the other schools in terms of dependent origination. Dixon. Okay. Dixon.
Oh yeah. That don't what the Tenzin Reba don't tell you Chasu Doban Judas. Tenzin Reba Tendi Imjusin Chuna Deba Maruba Chesuna and the Chatang Ajeta contra to Nerdo Marbe. Chasu Doban Joa in this.
So
Gomoluru is Asherolis.
Lesso.
Susun Gomoluru is Asherol.
Lesso.
Marin Gaban Joa Ness. Mariba Tokonanila Mariba the Lender Mariba de Gaba Pumba de Ne Jukala Tenen Gagu Arisana Shebi Tenu Gomba was Chuna de Maruba Shebi, don't need to be Sheraji, don't need Gomba Latene, Ne Kazaga dancing, the Shui dancing in Gan was till entered that.
So if one wishes to get rid of the different negativities such as attachment, anger, and delusion, then it's necessary to abandon that ignorance that gives rise to these negativities. And it is the understanding of dependent origination that allows for the abandonment of these negativities that are caused by a mistaken view. Dixon.
Maringa Banjo and Shebi Tenu Gomba was
Lesso.
Kazaga dancing, the Chuji dancing Pomba de and don't need to be Sheraji, don't need Gomba Latena to Ne Kazaga dancing, Chuji dancing in Gan was.
So by meditating and familiarizing oneself with emptiness, then this serves as an opponent to and harms the grasping at true self of persons and true self of phenomena. Dixon.
Gomba, Padan Dada Oman Jubaya, Teshi Tenju Ribandi in the Tanga Jawa, Tada Jubashi is water the Tendik down that the Rebi Jabin said on the re. Teshi Tenju Ribandi in the Tanga Jawa Tada Jubashi, Tendi Imi Jusenji, the Mama Rubashi Lutala Tene, and the tongue about Pontu and Gan, is entered that.
So Master Chenrezig goes on to say that, again, that this view of dependent origination is this view of dependent origination, which establishes lack of true establishment, can negate all opposing views. So we find that this can negate all opposing views. Dixon.
Yes,
I forgot one thing, but I forgot it, so I don't know what it is.
Tanga Dawata the Jubashi, Jason Beso, Jutin Tata Yimati Tsena, Lududan, then be Keba is, then Lududan then be Keba yi, Tenji the Banju, don't to be Lantanis, Lududan then by Shiro the Demba. Sakala Sugumar Beta, Ludu Dembi Kebai, Tendi Imbi Jusenji Debamaruba Tusuna, Debamaruba Shesuna, what Degi, Debamaruba Shebate, Debamaruba Shebate, Shajaman Mudagi, Tembi, Ne Tambat Teres, Ne. And Tendi Debanju don't to be Lantanis. Lantani Ngobuchi Tembi Ne Dan Hibu Tatu Nido 추지다도 콘도 추바 먼저도 요그레스 텐데 미주선 추는 대마루바 시빌란데 네 샤자만 보다게 템바되게 힘분다 보더레스
Okay.
템바들라 롱게 템바도 두비 템바니요로 템비 다추 나니도 롱도 두비 다니도 전제제도 마제도 루바시비 코나오 샤자만 보다게 템바들라 롱게 템바도 두비 템바니 롱게 템바 간주 된주도 롱게 템바 말베 두비 템바 하수냐레도 라바송 셔라지라바 땡은지라바 셔라지라바 와데송데 두비 템바레도 말베 what does it
So it then says that all scholars such as Nagarjuna, all agree that the position that things are not truly established because of dependent origination is the essence or the heart of what Buddha Shakyamuni taught. That's it. So all scholars such as Nagarjuna concur that the position that things are not truly established because of dependent origination is the essence or heart of what Buddha Shakyamuni taught. Khensur Rinpoche.
That in the world del church nebi nene cheta kondu chumin jursa wa tek nona renwa. Ne tende yimi jusen chuna temba maruba sheba te shajaman buda tembi nyembu res. Tembi nyembu yimba te cheta kondu chuba manjute chuban juga res. Cheta kondu chuba manjute chuban juga res rwa. Wa te chuban juros. Wa tel chuba manjusong du cheta kondu chuba manjusong du kondu chuba lo kono marba. Chujin Chenmo nyemo sema dasana Chenmo sesa kono marba. Mati jaba sheta re ko nyemo kala sagwa masana Chenmo sesa kono. Maiga lo kono us maiga.
Oh, this is the sign. So this is the sign that it is the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Just like if someone is quite large and doesn't eat lunch, you can. It's the sign that they eat at night. If they don't eat in the day, if they're large, there's a sign there that they must eat at night. Likewise, this teaching of dependent origination that roots out ignorance is the essence of what the Buddha taught. Isn't
The Kudawa Jana Kaji Shilha Shila Ji Chila Meshishi Mainga June Dudula Sheba Pomba Yintes Sheda Kundu Chuba Manjusate Shilha Jilla Neshigaman Lasuna Kusheba Kuruta and the Shilha Jilla Kushigu Yabalange Shigaman Lasuna and Kujazin Shedamatu Kushigu Kogurwa what did our resonata Kaji Shilha Shil Tiche Meshishi Maiga June Dudula Sheba Pomba Jinos Lilabish Kushidu Yabajilla Neshigaman Lasuna Sheba Kogures. Seta kondu chumi jor.
Gongyo mebachi ngi selpo la tu.
Tenzin deban joyi lan seta kondu chumi joros. Tenzi dubi doni dubi lan tenbi nyeba yinba te keba yina seta kondu chuba manju te chugres. Kondu chuba lo kogwa res. Chuba jo pana sheken jiga meshe lazuna sheba kogro. Kui jazin sheda matu kui shegres.
So, just as so the scholars agree that this position is the essence of the Buddha's teaching, which can allow one who doesn't know to know or to understand. So it allows an understanding, and I might have missed, not 100% there, but it allows someone to know who did not.
Ta tomo maimbe tende tu belan te tembi nyebu yente shidin les ngumulu shibi tin rendoa tenji debanjo de jawayi songen zeji jeba samutte sheson bisherosa tomoda tomo mayibe tendi tubi lante tembi nyebures nyebe yembate susondu sa ngumulu shidin les ngumulu shidin tenji debanjo de jawayi songen zeji jeba samutte sheson bisherosa what the tended to belong to me him but to tango marota.
And then and there's another quote from the Nagarjuna's letter to a friend that supports this as well, that it's the pith of the Buddha's teachings, this teaching on dependent origination is the pith. You can probably find it. I found it before, pith of it. Okay, just give me one moment. We're going to end here. And I just... So this text in praise of dependent origination is a great text to use as a prayer. So to use, to recite as a prayer. So I'll find this another time, but we'll do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang to shine forever. Send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri, likewise Samantabhadra as well. Whatever dedication is praised as supreme, conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All-powerful Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Wandak, upholder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, the spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts with exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Tuji Rinpoche Gutsi Shapi Denalam.
Oh, yeah.